Disclaimer. If you like the new Star Wars trilogy, you're gonna hate this video. Also follow me on Twitter at JoeFromSeattle1. I honestly don't know why the Disney Star Wars series has been so polarizing. You know what I mean? Like, obviously not everyone is gonna like every movie, and there's always gonna be something to talk about with something as big as Star Wars, but I honestly don't know why so many people get so defensive over the new Star Wars series. Personally, I can't stand the new trilogy. I grew up on Star Wars and I adore the universe, and that's why I hate it now. I thought Force Awakens was actually pretty good, and while it definitely didn't explain things as much as I would have hoped, it didn't open up any giant holes in the timeline or rip apart the established rulebook of the universe.
But I didn't know the lengths to which you'd go, the depths to which you'd sink.
What depths? What sink? What are you talking about?
I could literally make a 10-hour video about why I hate The Last Jedi, and a 5-hour video about why I hate Solo, but not Rogue One, because Rogue One is actually really fucking good, don't at me. But let me tell you something else I hate. This article from the Mary Sue trying to prove that the new Star Wars trilogy is better than everything that came before it. Not just the prequels, the originals as well. Someone actually wrote this. I understand that opinions exist, and not everyone is going to like the same thing, but... Also, just going forward, this video is not going to have anything to do with SJW culture or
strong female protagonist
or whatever. There's a million other problems with the new Star Wars trilogy's writing and world building, and I hate it when people just boil down all the criticisms to dumb Twitter talking points like that. There are countless examples of horrible writing, world building, tonal shifts, characterization, military tactics, so on and so forth in the sequel trilogy that the whole SJW thing shouldn't even be near the top of the list of complaints. Okay? Okay. Let's get into this article. Another weekend, another bad take on the internet, making people mad. Yesterday, it was this article from CNET that made the bold claim that the new Star Wars trilogy is worse than the prequels. I would honestly agree with that, because while the prequels were terrible movies from a filmmaking standpoint and from a direction and acting standpoint, the world that they created and the story they told was consistent with the universe. The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, they may be more fun to look at and they may seem nicer on the surface. In terms of the stories being told, yes, the prequels are better. It's a clickbaity headline, yes, but the points the article makes, that J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson have something to learn from George Lucas's abysmal work behind the camera on the prequel trilogy, is just wrong. On every meaningful level, the new Star Wars films are miles better than the prequel trilogy, and in some ways, they're actually better than the originals. You know, I can think of some ways that the new trilogy is actually better than the originals. I think they recorded a higher resolution. The effects are better. That's about it. A lot of the criticisms of the new trilogy in the bad article is is about the plot arcs and character beats of the new films, but the author's arguments rest on a very bad premise, mainly that he's talking about a trilogy that isn't complete yet. Sorry, dude. You can't criticize Rey's arc for being unfocused if you don't know where it's going. This is what I was talking about when I said people are so defensive of the new trilogy. Oh, you can't criticize Rey's arc because it's not complete yet. Nobody was making these criticisms of the prequels when they were coming out one at a time. Nobody was making these criticisms of the original trilogy when they were coming out one at a time. You never hear these criticisms of movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Criticisms of a story arc in an existing series being incomplete only come when bits and pieces of the new series are poorly written. A movie should be able to stand on its own, and I shouldn't have to consume almost 5 hours of media to understand someone's story. In a movie. You're telling me that in order for me to understand the story arc of one character, that being Rey, I have to watch both episode 7 and episode 8 and episode 9 just to understand her. Take a look at Luke. Luke is personified perfectly within the first 5 minutes of his screen time in A New Hope. Take a look at Anakin. He's terribly acted and terribly written in terms of the script, but you know everything you need to know about Anakin within the first 10 minutes of his screen time in The Phantom Menace. And the same goes for Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was personified twice, once in A New Hope and once as a completely different kind of character in Phantom Menace. Both times, you knew exactly what he was about within the first 10 minutes of his screen time. Now tell me about Rey. What's her deal? I know she comes from a junk planet. I know she's sensitive to the Force for some reason. I know she's tech savvy. And this is what's frustrating to me about when people try to defend Rey's arc as being unfocused and all that, because there are other new characters in the new trilogy who are personified way better than her. I know everything I need to know about Finn. I know everything I need to know about Poe. And even Kylo, who I had some issues with Kylo in The Last Jedi, but honestly I think he's the best character in the new series right now because at least he's interesting. That was one of the most hilarious aspects of The Last Jedi to me. It was supposed to be this movie that really brought Rey to the forefront and really made her the main focus, and she is now the savior of the Jedi. But I care so much more about the villain of the series now because he was personified 50 times better than the hero. So don't tell me about how the trilogy isn't complete yet and I can't criticize Rey's arc. We're almost 5 hours into a trilogy and I don't understand the main character. That is bad writing. End of story. We have no idea how the new Sage will end. Nice. So it's incredibly silly to compare the 3 movie arcs of the prequels or the originals or 2 movies in a trailer. Okay, so why'd you write this article? Because you're doing exactly that. He acknowledges things like the writing and acting of the new films are better, and yet still sees fit to criticize plots that aren't complete. The prequel plots weren't complete. And by the existence of the new trilogy, the original trilogy's plot wasn't complete. By your logic, we can't criticize any Star Wars movie because Episode 9 isn't out yet, so the entire arc isn't complete. But no, keep trying to find any angle you can to damage control bad writing. This is what I'm talking about. Like, why do you care so much? Someone says that the prequels have better writing and better characterization than the sequel trilogy. Someone says that Rey's story arc in the new trilogy is unfocused, which is objectively true. And you write a massive article talking about how this is actually better than the originals, guys. How desperate are you? And why do you care so much? Why can't we just accept that this is a poorly written saga and move on? Or sorry, poorly written sage. And the critiques of the plots that are complete are bad too. The author argues that the new films have no dramatic stakes and that we don't get any big deaths like Qui-Gon's in the prequels. I mean, yeah. I feel no pressure or no stakes at all going into Episode 9 because of what I saw in The Last Jedi. So many plot conveniences and just boneheaded military decisions by the First Order. I don't understand anything about how this war has gone on so long. I don't understand where the First Order came from. Leia just space Jesus'd her way out of death. I don't feel any stakes going into Episode 9 because there's no rules anymore. As for the no big death thing, I wouldn't agree with that. There have been some big deaths, and to be fair, a big death isn't necessary for a movie to be impactful or emotional. I guess he fell asleep when Han Solo got skewered by his own son in The Force Awakens, or when Rey and Kylo unexpectedly killed the red herring big bad in The Last Jedi. Kylo killed him. Rey had nothing to do with that.
Now, foolish child, he ignites it and kills his true enemy.
I'm convinced you didn't actually watch The Last Jedi. Rey literally had nothing to do with Snoke being killed. He must have also dreamed up a version of The Phantom Menace where Qui-Gon, an interesting character, not a series of plot devices who stole a child from his home and left his mom in slavery. Yeah, anything sounds bad when you boil it down like that. Qui-Gon didn't steal a child from his home. He found a Force-sensitive child and then said to his mom, I can take this child to be trained to be a Jedi. And she said, okay, because she had to stay where she was. What? He also argued that the prequels have dramatic tension when they are, by their nature, predetermined in how they end. That I actually agree with. There is a lot of tension in the prequels, but there's less than there could be because ultimately you know how it's going to end. You know that the characters in the original trilogy will somehow live, and pretty much everyone else is going to die in one way or another. However, back in high school, I was dating someone who had not seen any of the Star Wars movies. She had somehow gone 17 years of her life without seeing Star Wars. So I started her at the beginning, like episode 1, and we watched in chronological order, and she had no idea where the story was going. That should be worth something. It's all bad faith, straw man fallacies. I just love seeing Mary Sue articles talk about straw mans. Your website is literally built off of straw man fallacies. The comparisons in the article reek of fanboy rage about how Star Wars is different now, and it shows in the shallowness of the arguments and accusations that the prequels bypass the new trilogy in any way. And again, this is all hilarious coming from someone who has just been making mistakes recounting the plot of the prequels and even the movie they're defending. Rey didn't kill Snoke. Qui-Gon didn't steal Anakin. Do you actually care about this series, or are you just being told that you should? The prequel trilogy were essentially bad fanfic made independently by a man who didn't care about emotion, plot, or impact. They were boring, 2-hour-long toy commercials with wooden dialogue, terrible acting, that used nascent CGI and digital technology to place characters in environments where they looked as lifeless and fake as possible.
Liar!
I'm trying to, throw you a lifeline here, because some of these things I actually agree with. The prequel trilogies are wooden. A lot of them do feel like fanfics. A lot of them are boring. The first 2 acts of Attack of the Clones are some of the worst sci-fi I have ever seen. But also Revenge of the Sith is unironically a really great movie and one of the top 3 best Star Wars movies, don't at me. But let's go back and look at this. To place characters in environments where they looked as lifeless and fake as possible. By today's standards, sure. But these movies were praised for their special effects when they came out, and a lot of them still look great today. I mean, watch Revenge of the Sith and watch all of the space sequences, watch the sequence with Obi-Wan and General Grievous. 14 years later, that still looks really good. The new Star Wars films, including Rogue One and Solo, get back to the solid, real filmmaking and fun, complex characters that made the first... Oh man, Rogue One, sure, but Solo, oh my god. Solo was a flop because it went out of its way to shit on the original character's lore and mystique. And instead of sucking the life out of the myth and mystery of the originals, I literally just said that's what they do. And majesty of the originals, the way the prequels do, they all improve on it. What about destroying someone's character and breaking established rules of the universe? What about that is improvement? Leia, with no Force training, rescues herself from the vacuum of space, and nobody even mentions this. Force ghosts have a physical impact on the world around them now. Where have they been all this time? Does that mean there's just an army of Force ghosts that just haven't been helping with the obvious universe conflict that's been going on the last few years? Where'd the First Order come from? Where'd the Resistance come from? At the end of The Last Jedi, there's a couple dozen Resistance fighters left. How are they not dead? And this is all just skipping right over the whole Rey elephant in the room. How is Rey so good at everything? I would be okay with Rey being so good at everything if they at least told us why that is. Every other character in Star Wars has to work for their stature. Every single character that is shown to be powerful or shown to be smart, we know why they are that way. Rey is the only exception, and that is why she is a problem with this story. The characters in the original trilogy, a movie made for kids, as Freddie Pryce Jr. just reminded us, are literal archetypes straight out of Joseph Campbell. They're great, but ultimately simple, and that's fine. Yeah, and they're still somehow more complex and interesting than the sequel trilogy. 30 years later. But the characters in these new films are far more complex and interesting. Even the old characters have grown up and advanced in complexity. Everyone in the new films is more morally ambiguous and rebellious. One might say, better. Everyone in the new films is morally ambiguous. Do you know what that means? I would say there's one character who's morally ambiguous in the new series. Maybe 2 if you count Del Toro's character in Last Jedi. If we're talking about the base episodes of the new trilogy, episodes 7 and 8, who is morally ambiguous outside of Kylo and the Master Codebreaker? And what is rebellious about everyone fighting for one of 2 causes? What is more complex about characters who are, again, just archetypes? You say the characters in the original trilogy are archetypes. The characters in the new trilogy are just different archetypes. You have the reformed villain character. You have the morally ambiguous character who doesn't know where his allegiances lie. You have the big baddie who's controlling everything behind the scenes. You have the character who doesn't know very much about where they come from, but they know they have a good moral compass. And then you have the hotshot pilot who's just there to do the right thing. These are all archetypes too. They're just different archetypes. And they're not majority white and male. Yes, we're going there. Oh boy. The diversity and progressive ideals of the new Star Wars films place them miles above the originals and the prequels. There's more than one woman, and there's more than one person of color. Look, I'm not gonna get too far into this because this is just a fucking rabbit hole here. But I'm just gonna say, if you are looking for quotas based on things that people cannot control about themselves, and you're using that to judge the quality of a movie, you are an asshole. These women and people of color have agency and don't just die of a broken heart or serve as plot devices or love interests. There's a really interesting theory about how Padme didn't actually die of a broken heart. She died because Sidious killed her, which is why Sidious knows that she's dead. It's a really cool theory, actually. I can make a whole video about that. And that's part of the reason why I love the prequels, because they're shitty movies, but they're consistent with the rest of the universe, and they leave a lot of things open for interpretation in ways that are still consistent. The whole point of new trilogy is how important a diverse and democratic force is. Nostalgia is very kind to the original Star Wars trilogy. Yeah, so is good writing, good acting, great characters, great action, really good pacing, and excellent world building. Those are pretty important to the original trilogy too. But we can love something, and believe me, I do love the old films, and appreciate its flaws. Nostalgia, however, has never been kind to the prequels. Are you kidding me? Go to r/prequel memes, and you will want to revise this entire article. There has to be some sort of fandom Stockholm syndrome at work for a discerning viewer to think that the basic filmmaking of the new movies isn't better than anything that's come in the past, but it's probably just the same anger we see from all sorts of Star Wars fans when they're confronted by the fact that this franchise doesn't just belong to little white boys anymore. I don't think anyone is denying that like the actual physical filmmaking of the new trilogy is better because, you know, that's how technology works. Yeah, the cinematography is excellent in the new trilogy. The special effects are amazing, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it completely breaks the universe in so many ways. But as for this, the franchise doesn't belong to little white boys anymore? I'll just leave that bit up to you guys in the comments to talk about. Just add the Force belongs to everyone. Just like the boring myths and rules of the old Jedi Order had to be destroyed, so too does the idea that George Lucas was some misunderstood genius whose prequel trilogy was anything but an ego trip that misunderstood everything that was great about his first film. Nobody is saying George Lucas is a misunderstood genius. But I hate to break it to you, if you love the new film so much, you have to thank George Lucas, because it was kind of his creation. Lucas got lucky with Star Wars and continued to get lucky when he worked with other directors on Empire and Return of the Jedi, and Indiana Jones. Like, George Lucas isn't some idiot who had one good idea. He's had a lot of really bad ideas, yes, but he's also had a lot of really good ones. Let's not discredit someone's achievements just because you don't like what someone said on the internet. But it was J.J. Abrams, just one of them, Rian Johnson, and perhaps most importantly, Kathleen Kennedy, that got what worked in Star Wars and improved it, diversified it, and democratized it. It's so funny that you keep saying democratized it, because what you're describing in this article is not democratizing something. It is shutting up all opinions you don't like and completely discrediting people's arguments against the things that you want to believe. That is not democratizing something. Their films weren't made just to sell toys or tell dry, unmoving backstory. They They made films to inspire audiences. All audiences. Mainly shareholders. And that's why, by my reckoning, they're better than anything that came before. I would go and look into the comment section, but I mean, this is the Mary Sue. This is a garbage damage control article. I don't care if you like the prequels. I don't care if you like the sequels. I don't care if you don't care about Star Wars and you're just here for me, because I'm here for you too. But the reason I felt the need to talk about this article is not so much because of how I feel about Star Wars, partly because of that, and because it's fun to talk about Star Wars. I could literally talk about Star Wars for hours. I love this universe so much, and that's why I hate the new trilogy. But the reason I wanted to talk about this article is because of a really just annoying and kind of concerning trend I've seen online a lot from a lot of journalists, is that someone says something about something you like. They criticize something you like. At which point, instead of, opening a discussion, having a debate of ideas, talking about the things that you guys disagree with, you have to double down on the thing that you like, even though you obviously don't understand it. In this article, they misrepresent the universe that they're trying to defend. They said Rey killed Snoke in episode 8. They said Qui-Gon stole Anakin from his mother. And I'm supposed to take your opinion seriously about Star Wars? Like I said at the beginning of the video, there are a million reasons to criticize the new trilogy. There are a million objectively wrong things about it. And I could criticize The Last Jedi for hours and hours and hours without ever talking about the female protagonist. I could criticize the new trilogy for hours and never talk about these SJW type things. I can criticize these movies intelligently, but you can't defend them intelligently. And that's the problem that I have with a lot of journalists nowadays. A journalist says they like something. Someone criticizes the thing that they like, and instead of debating with the criticisms, the journalist just doubles down uninformatively to try and destroy all possible angles of criticism of them and the thing that they like. I'm honestly kind of interested about what episode 9 is going to do for Star Wars, just because there's such a massive mess that JJ needs to clean up. At this point, my relationship to Star Wars is kind of like my relationship to Fortnite. It's this crazy popular thing with a fan base I don't understand anymore, and I'm more entertained watching the inner workings of it than I am actually watching the content I'm supposed to be entertained by. Oh well. Toodles.